The war had been raging for years. Humanity was locked in a struggle for survival against the alien Zorvian Empire. The Zorvians were a powerful and ancient species, but their empire was crumbling. The humans, led by Commander Nathan Bennett, had managed to hold their ground. The war was at a standstill, but it was clear that neither side could win without devastating consequences. Nathan had seen his share of battles. As a commander, he had made countless tough decisions, but this one was different. The Zorvian Queen, Talia, had sent a message, a strange offer that no one expected. She proposed a peace agreement, one that would involve a fake marriage between her and a human leader. The idea was that if the two sides could unite in such a way, the war would come to an end. It sounded like madness, but at that point, Nathan was willing to try anything to stop the bloodshed. The message arrived in the dead of night. The Zorvian diplomats were clear. This was no trick. The queen, Talia, had grown desperate. Her people were on the edge of collapse, and if the war continued, her empire would fall. But Nathan and his people were equally desperate. His soldiers were dying, and Earth was starting to feel the weight of the conflict. He couldn't afford to ignore her. The following days were filled with heated discussions. The idea of a fake marriage between the human commander and the Zorvian queen was absurd. But the more they thought about it, the more they realized that it might be the only way. The war had already taken a heavy toll. Hundreds of thousands of lives had been lost on both sides. Nathan knew that if he agreed to this, he might be able to save more lives. After much deliberation, the decision was made. Nathan would meet Queen Talia. The marriage would be symbolic, a political move, meant to fool the masses. There would be no real love between them, no real commitment. It would be a way to end the war and bring peace to the galaxy. At least, that was the plan. When Nathan entered the Zorvian palace, he was struck by its grand scale. The palace was a towering structure made of strange, dark materials that seemed to absorb the light around them. As he walked down the long corridors, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision that had led him here. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of two species. At the end of the hall, he entered the throne room. The Zorvian queen sat on her throne, her eyes fixed on him as he approached. Talia was a striking woman, tall and regal, with pale skin and long silver hair that shimmered in the dim light. Her features were sharp, and her eyes glowed with an intensity that seemed both captivating and intimidating. She had the presence of someone who had been born to rule, someone who carried the burden of an entire empire on her shoulders. "Commander Bennett," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "I trust you understand the gravity of this meeting." Nathan nodded, his hands clenched at his sides. He knew the stakes. "I understand," he replied. "But I need to ask, why me? Why not someone else from my leadership?" Talia's gaze softened for just a moment. "Because you are the one who can end this war. You have the strength to do what others cannot. The marriage will be the symbol that both our peoples need. It will show that the war is over." Nathan wasn't sure he believed her, but he wasn't in a position to argue. He had to trust that this was their best shot at peace. He had no idea what was going to happen next. But he had to make it work. The ceremony took place in front of millions. The media from both human and Zorvian territories covered the event. The Zorvian palace was filled with grand decorations, and the entire planet seemed to have come to a standstill. The holographic screens broadcasting the ceremony showed Nathan, in a formal suit, standing next to Queen Talia, who wore an extravagant gown that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. The vows were simple, and the words felt hollow. "I, Nathan Bennett, take you, Queen Talia, to end this war and bring peace to our peoples," Nathan said, his voice steady, but without any real emotion behind it. Talia, too, spoke her lines. "I, Talia of the Zorvian Empire, take you, Nathan Bennett, to unite our people and secure the peace." The crowd cheered, but Nathan could feel the unease in his chest. He knew it was all a lie, and yet there was something about Talia that made him uneasy in a different way. She wasn't like the leaders he had known. She wasn't like the enemy he had fought against for so long. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a sadness hidden beneath the armor of her royal persona. For a moment, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that this fake marriage might turn into something more than either of them had expected once the ceremony was over. The media's frenzy was relentless. The headlines blasted across the galaxy. Human and Zorvian leaders unite through marriage to end the war. The celebrations were loud and grand, but behind closed doors, things were different. Nathan and Talia were now bound together by this strange union, but it wasn't real. It couldn't be. After the ceremony, Nathan was taken to a private room, where Talia was waiting for him. The room was large and opulent, with Zorvian art decorating the walls. Talia stood by a window, staring out into the night sky. "Well, Commander," she said, her voice calm but carrying a hint of something more. "The war is over. But now we are tied together in ways that neither of us could have imagined." Nathan took a deep breath. "This is only temporary. We both know that." Talia turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps, what? In the eyes of the galaxy, we are now married. We're now symbols of peace, and for that, we must act accordingly." Nathan didn't know how to respond. He was here to end the war, to bring peace, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to be married to a woman who wasn't just a queen, but a ruler with her own complicated story. The war had ended, but the real struggle was only just beginning. As the weight of the situation settled on him, Nathan realized that this was more than just a fake marriage. The galaxy was watching, and the peace they had worked so hard to achieve depended on the two of them. But the real question was, could they make it work? Could they live the lie, or would they be forced to confront the truth of their bond? The weeks that followed the ceremony were filled with uncertainty. Nathan couldn't escape the feeling that everything was a facade. The marriage was supposed to be a political gesture, nothing more. Yet, as the days passed, it became harder and harder for him to ignore the growing tension between him and Queen Tali. At first, it seemed like they would go their separate ways after the peace treaty was signed, each returning to their respective duties, but that was not to be. The peace was fragile, and there were still enemies within both the human and Zorvian factions who wanted the war to continue. To keep the peace, Nathan and Talia had to present a united front. Their fake marriage was the perfect symbolist sign that two former enemies had come together for the greater good. In public, Nathan and Talia played their roles to perfection. They attended meetings, held press conferences, and posed for photographs. In the eyes of the galaxy, they were the perfect couple, the living proof that peace was possible. But behind closed doors, things were different. Nathan found himself spending more and more time with Talia at first. It was because they had two meetings, with diplomats discussing trade agreements and signing documents. But over time, their conversations started to shift. They began to talk about things beyond politics. Talia would ask about his childhood, his home, and what it was like to live on Earth. Nathan learned about her life as the Zorvian queen, her struggles, the responsibilities she carried, and the burden of leading an empire on the verge of collapse. Talia had always been a strong leader, known for her sharp mind and unyielding will. But as Nathan listened to her speak, he realized that she was not just a ruler. She was a woman who had been forced into a position she never wanted. Her eyes, usually cold and distant, softened when she spoke of her people, of the sacrifices she had made to keep her empire alive. One evening, as they sat in the royal palace's grand dining hall, Nathan watched as Talia carefully pushed her food around her plate. She wasn't eating much, and he could tell she was distracted. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice soft. He had never been one for small talk, but something about Talia made him want to know more. She glanced up, meeting his gaze. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" she asked, her voice low. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Do you mean Talia's side? This war, this fake marriage, it's all so complicated? We're pretending to be something we're not, and sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. My people are dying. Yours are too. Is this peace really what we need?" Nathan sat back in his chair, considering her words. "I don't know. But I know this: if we don't try, we'll never know. We've been fighting for so long. It's time to see if we can build something different, something better." Talia's eyes flickered with something hope, perhaps, or maybe just the smallest glimmer of doubt. She looked away, staring out the window into the vast Zorvian landscape. Maybe you're right, but I don't know if I can do this alone, Nathan. Didn't know how to respond. He'd always been a soldier, not a diplomat. He wasn't used to talking about feelings or fears, but something in Talia's voice made him realize how much she was struggling. He had seen the strength she projected to the outside world, but now he saw the vulnerability beneath it. I'm not going anywhere, he said simply. You don't have to do this alone. Not anymore. Talia looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something that made Nathan's heart beat a little faster. For the first time since they had met, he didn't feel like they were just playing a role. There was a real connection between them, one that neither of them had expected. The next few days were strange. Nathan and Talia found themselves spending more time together than ever before. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and laughter. They found moments of peace in the midst of their shared responsibilities. It was clear that something was changing between them, something neither of them could ignore. One afternoon, they found themselves walking through the palace gardens, a peaceful place filled with exotic plants from all over the galaxy. A rare moment of calm in the otherwise chaotic world they inhabited. Nathan admired the beauty of the garden, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Talia. She was walking beside him, her posture regal, but there was a softness in her expression that he hadn't seen before. This place is beautiful, he said, breaking the silence. Talia smiled, though it was brief.
Oh, it is.
But it's also a reminder of what we've lost. My people have fought for centuries to protect our way of life, and now it's all changing, and I'm not sure I'm ready for it. Nathan looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. In a long time, change isn't easy. But maybe it's the only way forward. Talia stopped walking and turned to face him. Do you ever think about the future? About what happens after the war is truly over? Nathan took a deep breath. He hadn't allowed himself to think too much about what would happen once the peace was secured. But now, standing here with Talia, the question felt impossible to ignore. I've been so focused on the war. I haven't thought about it much, he admitted. But maybe it's time we both start thinking about what comes next. For us, for everyone. Talia's eyes softened, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. She stepped closer to him, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan, I never wanted any of this. But now, I don't know what to feel. I don't know if I can keep pretending that what we have is just a lie. Nathan's heart raced. He had been struggling with the same feelings, but hearing her say it out loud made it all the more real. You don't have to pretend anymore, he said quietly, his voice steady but full of emotion. Maybe we don't have all the answers, but we can figure this out together. Talia reached out, touching his arm lightly. Together? Nathan nodded. Together. In that moment, the fake marriage they had entered into for the sake of peace suddenly felt very real. Neither of them knew where this new path would lead, but one thing was clear. Things between them had changed. And it was no longer just about a political alliance. It was about something much deeper. Something that neither of them had ever expected. As the sun set over the garden, casting a warm glow over the two of them, they both realized that the war was not the only battle they had to face. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, they were no longer facing it alone. Days turned into weeks, and Nathan and Talia found themselves caught in the delicate balance between peace and war. The galaxy had taken their marriage as a symbol of unity, a sign that the impossible had been achieved. But the reality of maintaining that peace was far from easy. Both the Zorvian Empire and the human factions had their own agendas, and not everyone was happy about the new alliance between their leaders. Nathan knew that things weren't as simple. As the peace talks made them appear, he was a soldier, trained to fight, and now he had to learn to navigate a world of politics, diplomacy, and deceit. Every decision he made seemed to affect not only his people, but Talia's as well. He had never been prepared for this kind of responsibility. He had been ready to fight for peace, but now that it was here, the weight of it felt much heavier than he had ever imagined. One evening, as they sat together in the royal palace, Nathan looked at Talia, who seemed lost in thought. She was staring out of the window, watching the stars outside. The palace was quiet. The distant sounds of the Zorvian capital seemed like a faint hum. "You're thinking about the future again, aren't you?" Nathan asked gently, breaking the silence. Talia didn't immediately answer. As always, so careful with her words, as if every sentence she spoke carried the weight of an empire. Finally, she turned to him and nodded. "Everything is changing too quickly," she said softly. "We've won the war, but now we must rebuild. My people are still recovering. The damage is far deeper than anyone realizes." Nathan could hear the sadness in her voice. She had been the one to carry the burden of her empire's survival, and now she was watching it shift in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had been a warrior, but now she was learning to be something else. Ruler trying to guide her people into a future they hadn't been prepared for. "I know," Nathan said. "I can't even begin to imagine the weight you're carrying, but we'll get through this together." Talia's eyes met his, and for a moment, Nathan could see something more in her eyes than just the cold resolve of a queen. There was doubt, fear, and something Sephora, need for reassurance. It made Nathan realize just how much they were, both struggling to navigate the new world they were creating. "Do you ever wonder if we made the right choice?" she asked. "If this marriage is really what's best for both our people?" Nathan leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. He had asked himself the same question more than once, but it wasn't something he had an easy answer for. He had done what he thought was necessary to end the war, to save lives, but now he was beginning to understand that peace came at a cost. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought this would be easier, but nothing about this feels easy." "Anymore?" Talia smiled faintly. "At least you're honest." "I've spent so much time pretending. I've lost track of what's real." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Nathan found himself at a loss for what to say. The fake marriage they had entered into was meant to be just that, a political move, a way to end the war. But as time went on, it was becoming harder for him to separate the truth from the lie. "I never wanted this," Talia continued, her voice steady but quiet. "But now, I don't know what I want. I've spent so much of my life fighting. I've never had the chance to think about myself." Nathan reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first real moment of connection they had shared in weeks. "You're not alone in this," he said. "We'll figure it out together. We'll find a way to make it work." Talia looked at him, her expression softening for the first time in what felt like forever. "But what if it doesn't work? What if I'm not the person you thought I was?" Nathan shook his head. "Talia, I'm not here because of politics. I'm here because of you. This isn't just a marriage to end the war. This is about us. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Her eyes flickered with something, maybe hope, maybe relief. But before she could say anything, the door to the room opened, and a Zorvian officer stepped inside. His presence was enough to break the moment, and Nathan could see Talia's walls go back up instantly. "Your Majesty, Commander Bennett," the officer said with a slight bow. "There's a matter we need to discuss." Talia straightened in her chair, her posture commanding once more. "What is it?" The officer hesitated for a moment, glancing between Nathan and Talia. "There are factions within the Zorvian Empire who do not support this peace. They are organizing against the new alliance. They want to continue the war." Nathan felt a knot form in his stomach. He had known the peace was fragile, but this was worse than he had anticipated. There were still those who were willing to destroy everything they had worked for. Talia stood up, her face set in stone. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. I will deal with it." The officer nodded and left the room, leaving Talia and Nathan alone once again. "We can't let this happen," Talia said, her voice cold and commanding once more. "If they want to keep fighting, they'll learn the hard way."
Nathan nodded.
He had always been a soldier, trained for war. But now, he had to become something else. He had to fight for peace, even when it seemed impossible. "I'll stand with you," he said. "Whatever it takes." With a new determination, then we'll make sure that the price of peace isn't paid in blood. We'll stop them. Nathan knew there was no turning back. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. The peace they had worked so hard to build was now under threat, and it was up to both of them to protect it. as Talia looked. Out the window, her gaze distant but resolute, Nathan realized that the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The marriage that had started as a fake alliance had now become the symbol of a fragile peace, one that could either unite the galaxy or tear it apart. And as he stood by her side, Nathan knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let that happen. Not now, not ever. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. The peace treaty had been signed, and it had been accepted by both sides, but Nathan knew that the real work had just begun. The factions that wanted to continue the war were not going to disappear. Just because a marriage had been arranged, the Zorvian Empire was a vast and powerful force, and not all of its leaders were willing to accept the terms of peace. There were those who saw the alliance between Nathan and Talia as a betrayal. They wanted nothing more than to see the war continue. Nathan and Talia had spent the past week meeting with key members of both their governments, trying to keep the peace intact. But as the days went on, it became clearer that the situation was more fragile than either of them had anticipated. Every decision they made seemed to anger someone, and tensions were rising. One evening, as Nathan stood on the balcony of the royal palace staring out at the sprawling city below, he couldn't help but feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. The Zorvian capital was beautiful, but it also felt heavy with the ghosts of the past. The war had left its mark on everyone. Even the brightest of futures seemed clouded by the horrors of what they had just endured. Talia stepped outside, joining him on the balcony. She was silent for a moment, watching him, as if she could read his thoughts. "I know what you're thinking," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "This peace, this marriage, it was supposed to end the war. But now it feels like we're just fighting a new battle." Nathan nodded slowly. "I didn't expect it to be easy. But I didn't think it would feel like this either." Talia sighed and leaned on the railing beside him. "I don't know how to keep my people united. I'm their queen, but they don't all agree with my decisions. I don't know if I can keep pretending that this marriage is just for show." Nathan turned to her, his expression serious. "Talia, we can't keep pretending either, but I don't know what else to do. If we show weakness now, if we let our people see the cracks, the peace will fall apart. We have to be strong for them." Her eyes met his, and for a moment it felt like they were the only two people in the galaxy. "I don't know if I can keep pretending," she said again, her voice softer this time. "But I don't know how to make it real. I don't know what that would even look like." Nathan didn't know how to answer her. He had been struggling with the same feelings, but he had always been a soldier, not someone who could easily speak about feelings. He had always been taught to focus on the mission, the goal, and the goal now was peace no matter what it cost. Before he could say anything else, a soft beep from his communicator interrupted them. It was a message from one of his officers, informing him of a problem that had escalated within the Zorvian Empire. A group of rebellious generals had launched an attack on a key human colony, trying to provoke a war between the two species once more. Nathan's heart sank. "It's happening," he muttered. Talia's expression hardened. "I knew this was coming. We have to act fast." The room was dimly lit, with the only light coming from the large table in the center, covered with holographic maps and projections of the galaxy. The council was made up of key military leaders from both the human and Zorvian sides. There was a tense silence as Nathan and Talia entered, and all eyes turned toward them. "Tell me what's going on," Nathan said, his voice calm but firm. One of the human generals spoke up. "A group of Zorvian officers has taken control of a fleet and attacked the colony on Omega 5. They're claiming that the peace treaty was a mistake and that the war must continue. They've already begun preparing for more attacks." Talia's face darkened. "This is an act of treason. We need to stop them before this escalates into full-blown war," Nathan said. "But we can't afford to act rashly. If we move too quickly, we risk making things worse." Talia turned to him. "We need to take control of the situation, Nathan. If we don't, we'll lose everything we've worked for." Nathan nodded, his mind racing. "I agree. But we need a plan, something that shows both sides that we won't back down, but that we're still committed to peace." They spent hours discussing strategies, analyzing their options. Some advocated for an immediate military response, while others pushed for a diplomatic solution. Talia and Nathan knew that no matter what, they decided they would be risking everything. The rebellion in the Zorvian Empire was a clear sign that the peace was still fragile. And if they failed to act quickly and decisively, the war could begin again. "We'll have to send a message," Talia said finally, her voice cold with determination. "Not just to the rebels, but to everyone. The peace we've created is not something that can be destroyed so easily." Nathan agreed. "We'll show them that the war is over, not just because of a marriage, but because we've chosen to make it real. We'll fight for peace not for power, but for the future." The plan was set in motion. Nathan and Talia would lead a joint mission to confront the rebels head-on. It would send a clear message that the alliance between humans and Zorvians was not just a political move, but a commitment to a new future. The galaxy would see that they were united not just as leaders, but as partners. The night before the mission, Nathan found himself alone again, standing outside on the palace balcony. The stars shone brightly above him, but his thoughts were heavy. Tomorrow, everything would change. He had always been a soldier, a man of action. But now, he was also a symbol of something much larger, a symbol of peace, of hope for a new future. Talia joined him once again. She didn't speak at first, but Nathan could feel her presence beside him. They both understood that this was more than just a military mission. It was about something deeper, something that neither of them had expected to find in the midst of a fake marriage. "Talia," Nathan said softly, "I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I promise you, I'll stand by your side, no matter what." She smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I never thought I'd be in this position, but now that I am, I'm not going to let it go to waste. Let's end this together." As they stood side by side, the weight of the world on their shoulders, Nathan realized that their bond, once just a political tool, had become something far more real than either of them had ever imagined. They weren't just playing a role anymore. The mission to stop the rebellious factions had begun. Nathan and Talia were at the center of it, leading their forces into battle. But this was not like any other mission they had faced before. This was different. It wasn't just about winning the war, it was about saving the peace they had worked so hard to build. The stakes had never been higher. They were fighting not only for the future of their peoples, but for the future of their very alliance. The battle had begun with a series of coordinated attacks against the rebel fleet. But the situation was more complex than anyone had anticipated. The rebels were scattered across multiple systems, and they had a number of strategic strongholds that were difficult to neutralize. Nathan had expected this would be a quick strike, a chance to show the rebels that their actions would not be tolerated. But as the days dragged on, it became clear that the fight was far from over. Talia sat in the command room of the flagship, staring at the holographic map in front of her. She was dressed in military armor, the same armor she had worn when leading her forces into battle during the height of the war. This time, there was no excitement in her eyes, no thrill of the fight, only determination. She had fought for her empire for so long, and now she was fighting for something else, the hope of a lasting peace. Nathan stood beside her, watching the map as well. He had always been good at reading the battlefield, but this situation was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping out of their control. Every move they made seemed to lead to another problem, another complication. "We're running out of time," Nathan said, his voice tense. "The longer we wait, the more support the rebels will gain. We need to act now." Talia nodded, her face set in stone. "I know. But we can't afford to make any more mistakes. If we push too hard, we risk losing everything we've worked for." It was the same fear that had been growing in Nathan's mind. They couldn't just fight for peace. They had to show everyone that peace was possible, that it wasn't just a temporary arrangement to end the war. But how could they do that when the galaxy itself seemed determined to tear them apart? The rebels had already attacked multiple Zorvian colonies, killing civilians in an effort to spark rebellion across the Empire. And yet, even as they fought to protect their people, Nathan and Talia had to be careful. Couldn't just strike out blindly. They needed to show that they were above the violence, that they weren't like the rebels they were fighting. Talia turned to Nathan. Her eyes filled with the weight of the decision she had to make. "We need to hit their supply lines," she said. "If we can cut off their resources, they won't be able to continue the fight. We have to be careful. If we're too aggressive, we'll only make them stronger." Nathan knew she was right. The last thing they needed was to make the situation worse, but it was difficult not to feel the pressure. The longer this went on, the more people were dying. It wasn't just the soldiers. Civilians on both sides were caught in the crossfire, and Nathan had heard rumors of whole cities being destroyed by the fighting. "All right?" Nathan said after a moment, his voice steady. "We'll target their supply routes, but we'll do it carefully. We'll show them that we have the strength to fight, but we'll do it in a way that doesn't destroy everything we've built." Talia looked at him, her gaze softening for just a moment. "I trust you," she said quietly. The next few hours were a blur. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Nathan and Talia gave orders, coordinating their forces to strike at the heart of the rebels' operations. They targeted key supply lines and transport routes, using their combined fleets to shut down the rebels' ability to fight back. It was a delicate operation, but it worked. The rebels' strength began to falter as their resources dried up, but the battle wasn't over. The rebels, desperate to keep fighting, launched a final assault on a major human colony. They believed that by striking at the heart of the human alliance, they could reignite the war and undo everything that had been achieved. The news reached Nathan and Talia just as they were finishing their debriefing. A sense of dread settled over Nathan's chest. He knew that this would be the turning point. If they didn't stop the rebels now, they would be risking everything they had worked for. "We have to stop them," Nathan said, his voice tight. "We can't let them destroy everything." Talia's face was grim. "I agree. We'll launch a full counterattack. This ends now." Within hours, they had mobilized their forces and set course for the human colony. The rebels had already begun their assault, and the damage was spreading quickly. As they neared the planet, Nathan could see the devastation from the ship's viewports. Buildings were burning, and the sky was filled with the smoke of destruction. This was no longer just a battle for peace. It was a fight for survival. Talia turned to Nathan, her eyes filled with determination. "Can't let this be in vain. Not after everything we've been through." Nathan nodded, his heart heavy. "You won't. We'll finish this, Talia." As they arrived at the colony, the battle was already in full swing. The rebels had set up defenses around the city, but Nathan and Talia's forces were ready. Two of them led the charge, pushing through the enemy lines with the full strength of their fleets behind them. It was a brutal battle, one that felt as though it might last forever, but they pressed on, in the midst of the chaos. Nathan and Talia found themselves fighting side by side. It was no time for speeches, no time for anything but the mission. They moved with precision, taking down the rebel leaders and securing key positions. It was exhausting work, but they couldn't afford to stop. If they did, the peace they had fought for would be lost forever. Finally, after what felt like hours, the tide began to turn. The rebels were retreating, and the last of their strongholds were falling. Nathan stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching as the final shots were fired. The human colony was safe, but the cost had been high. As the dust began to settle, Talia stepped beside him. She was breathing heavily, but her eyes were steady. "We did it," she said quietly. Nathan nodded, though the victory didn't feel like one. There had been too much destruction, too much loss. The peace they had fought for was not something that could be taken lightly. It had come with a heavy price. "We did," Nathan agreed. "But it's not over yet. We have to keep fighting for this peace." Talia looked at him, her expression softer than he had seen it in a long time. "We will," she said, her voice firm. "Together." And as they stood there, side by side, they both knew that the fight for peace was far from over. But for the first time, they believed it was a fight worth fighting. For each other, for their people, for the future. The battle had ended, and the peace was still standing. But it wasn't the same. The rebel factions had been defeated, but the damage they had caused had left scars. Nathan and Talia stood together, looking at the aftermath. The colony they had fought so hard to protect was safe, but the cost was evident. Buildings were destroyed, and the people were scared. The war, while officially over, had left its mark. Nathan looked at Talia, who was standing beside him, her gaze distant. She had always been a strong leader, but now she looked weary. He could see the toll it had taken on her, the weight of being the Zorvian queen, the burden of leading her people through a time of change, and the struggles of holding up a marriage that had started as nothing more than a political tool. But now, it was more than that. Their bond had grown into something real, something neither of them had expected. For weeks, they had been fighting side by side, not only against the rebels, but also against the doubts that had lingered between them. Talia had questioned their marriage, unsure if it was really what either of them wanted. Nathan had felt the same, unsure of what it meant to be married to a queen, especially when their marriage had been forced by the circumstances of war. But now, standing here, he realized that their connection had become something genuine. It wasn't just about the war anymore. It wasn't about peace treaties or political alliances. It was about the two of them. Talia turned to him, her expression softer than it had been in a long time. "I never thought we would come this far," she said quietly, her voice low but filled with emotion. Nathan gave her a small smile. "I don't think any of us did, but here we are." They stood in silence for a moment, both of them lost in their thoughts. Nathan couldn't help but think about how much they had changed. What had started as a strategy to end a war had turned into something far more complicated. It wasn't just fighting for peace anymore. He was fighting for her for them. "We've made it this far," Nathan said, breaking the silence. "But what comes next?" "What happens now?" Talia took a deep breath. "We rebuild. We help our people recover. But we also have to face the reality of what we've become. The alliance between the Zorvians and the humans isn't just about politics anymore. It's about something real, something that can't be undone." Nathan nodded. He had always known that this was more than just a temporary arrangement, but now it felt like they were standing on the edge of something bigger. The peace between their peoples wasn't just a result of a marriage. It was the result of their shared struggles, their shared victories, and the bond they had built together. "I agree," Nathan said, "but we can't keep pretending. We need to decide what this marriage really means for us, for everyone." Talia's gaze softened as she looked at him. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "I didn't want to admit it at first, but now I realize that I can't keep hiding from it. This marriage was never just a political tool for me. I wanted something more. I think I always did." Nathan felt his heart beat a little faster. At her words, it wasn't just about the peace anymore. It wasn't just about keeping up appearances. It was about their feelings, real feelings that had been developing over time, growing stronger with each challenge they faced together. "You've always been more than just a queen to me." "Talia," Nathan said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "When we first met, I didn't know what to expect. But now, after everything we've been through, I can't imagine my life without you in it." Talia stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face, as if she were looking for something. "Nathan, I never wanted this marriage to be a lie. I never wanted it to be just a piece of paper. I thought if we could end the war, we'd be free. But I see now that freedom comes from something else. It comes from honesty, from choosing to make it real." Nathan reached out and took her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "Then let's make it real," he said quietly. "No more pretending. Let's build a future together, not just for our peoples, but for us. Let's make our marriage something that means more than just a symbol of peace. Let's make it about something real." Talia's eyes filled with emotion as she looked at him. "I want that too, Nathan. I want to stop pretending. I want to build a future with you, a real one." Those words, everything changed. The walls that had been built between them, the walls of doubt, of fear, of uncertainty, began to crumble. The marriage that had started as a political arrangement, a tool to end a war, became something deeper, something more meaningful. And in that moment, Nathan knew that they had made the right choice. Together they could build something that was not just about peace between their peoples, but about the connection they shared. The next few weeks were spent in quiet reflection and intense work. Nathan and Talia worked side by side, leading their people in the rebuilding efforts. The war had left scars, but they were determined to heal them. They traveled together to human and Zorvian colonies, working with leaders on both sides to ensure that the peace they had fought for would be lasting. Everywhere they went, the people watched them. They were no longer just the human commander and the Zorvian queen. They were symbols of hope, of what could happen when two enemies came together for a common cause. Nathan and Talia's marriage, once seen as a temporary alliance, had become a beacon of what was possible when love and trust were placed at the center of everything. But even as they worked to rebuild the galaxy, Nathan and Talia knew that their journey was far from over. The challenges would continue, the doubts would return, and the pressures of leadership would weigh heavily on them. But they also knew that they were no longer alone in facing those challenges. As they stood together on the balcony of the royal palace one evening, looking out over the peaceful city below, Nathan took Talia's hand in his once again. "We did it," he said softly. Talia smiled, her heart light for the first time in a long while. "We did," she agreed, "and will continue to do it. Together. Together." That was what mattered most now, and as the stars shone brightly above them, Nathan and Talia knew that the future was theirs to shape. The war was over, but their story was just beginning.